It's a text that I've been studying and practicing for quite a number of years, probably 15 years, something like that. And it's a text that I really love. I love the simplicity of it. I love the comprehensiveness of it. And it's had a very, very powerful effect on my own practice and my own experience of the Dharma and my own experience of my life, I suppose. I feel it's really helped me kind of land in my life with awareness and also kindness, which is another huge part of Bante's teachings, of course, and learn how to work with my direct experience in much more creative ways. And this has been very, very significant for me. If I look back to my previous practice, where I've been practicing for 15 years or so, by the time I came across this text and started to practice more in harmony with this text or more aligned with this text. I'd been doing the mindfulness of breathing, of course, for all those years as one of the primary practices in Triratna. And I realize now retrospectively that I understood mindfulness as being concentration. And then when I came across this text and I had the good fortune to be taught this text or this approach to this text by some really great people, I realized that I'd not understood mindfulness in its entirety. So I'd understood mindfulness as a kind of mind training in order to become concentrated and stabilized. But of course, in the text, mindfulness is being mindful of everything all the time. Being mindful of your postures, being mindful of your activities, being mindful of your thoughts, being mindful of your emotions, being mindful of your body. So rather than it just being a way to become concentrated, it's a way to become aware. And that for me was quite a significant distinction. And of course, concentration is a product of awareness, but I'd been far too narrow about it, far too kind of willed and forced around it. And it was a bit like dropping back and resting back in a much broader, more receptive quality of awareness. And then I could use my mindfulness to learn how to tune in very directly and deeply into what was actually happening. And then crucially, learn how to choose a more creative response. And of course, you can only choose the creative response if you know what's happening. So I guess that's what I mean. And I think it is worth saying that I came to Dharma practice when I was 27 in New Zealand. And that was having lived with really quite severe back pain for about 10 years by that point. I'd injured my spine when I was 16. So I came to Dharma practice because I wanted a way to ease my suffering. And I felt, I listened to the Dharma, which was saying there is suffering and there's a way to end suffering. And I thought, hurrah, that's what I want, in a very naive and simplistic way. And I think prior to adopting the Satipatthana approach, I'd always been trying to get rid of suffering. So it was, as I say, it was quite strained and willful and quite resistant to what's actually happening. And in the Satipatthana approach, I learned this really crucial distinction between sort of pain, if you like, just basic sensation, and then the secondary elaborative suffering, the mental and emotional suffering that arises when one isn't able to be with one's experience in any given moment. And this was a real revelation to me that I'd been searching for the end of suffering in the wrong way. But in the Satipatthana, there is this distinction between body and Vedana, which are givens in any moment. Here they are. You've got a body and you've got sensation. You've got Vedana, that very initial feeling tone of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And then you can interrupt the automatic arising of all the secondary suffering, all the thoughts about it, all the emotions about it. And even more amazingly, in the Satipatthana Sutta, we're given very clear instructions on how to guide the mental and emotional stream, the mind stream, towards freedom as opposed to contraction. And this has given me sort of an extraordinary gift of practice. I've still got physical pain, but realizing that I can be mentally and emotionally more free in relation to that. And I strongly believe that ultimately it's possible to be completely free in relation to that. So yeah, it's had a huge impact on my life. This is a conversation we're having this morning between myself and Dhammarati, who's on the team, and Sona, who's on the team. And then Hridaya Gita is also going to be joining us, which I'm really delighted about. She's a new order member, steeped in practice, and she's also a fantastic Tai Chi Qigong teacher, and we're going to bring that bodywork element into the retreat as well. So it's a really wonderful team. And then in this interview, we're going to hear from Sona and Dhammarati as well.
I had always known about the Satipatthana Sutta, but for some reason I didn't seem to quite connect with it fully. But then I started working with Vidyamala in Breathworks, and the Satipatthana Sutta was talked about and mentioned so often. And then Bhante brought out Living with Awareness, which I studied. And I became even more aware that there was a lot more to the sutra. What my whole experience was really was one of kind of deconstructing, if you like, what was happening in my mind by looking at the different aspects of mindfulness, going kind of into the bits and pieces and taking them apart, and then kind of constructing it back again, pulling it all back into a wholeness of the 7 factors of enlightenment, which seem to be like a bit like the spiral path that are just leading you onto something more wonderful, more interesting. It became more and more important to me.
I remember when I was a teenager, that the really sort of significant spiritual experiences were experiences of beauty, actually. And experiences where suddenly you're a bit waking up out of your confusion, you're seeing your own experience more deeply, more clearly. Those moments were such intense experiences of being alive and awake that what the Satipatthana Sutta does is it teaches you how to take awareness into the whole spectrum of your experience. And incredibly, you've got a choice about where your mind goes. That drive towards awareness and beauty in my own practice meets an articulation of what that looks like. And I think what you've got in the Satipatthana Sutta is this beautifully detailed unpacking of what it is that we can attend to in our experience that supports that deepening process of awareness.
I think what's interesting with these Dharma texts is, of course, we're dealing with translations of probably quite subtle and refined terms. Well, they're definitely subtle and refined terms. So we might hear it as being the disappearance of pain and discontent. I'm noticing in Analio's book, it's translated as the disappearance of dukkha. So they're quite careful not to translate dukkha as pain. Different. Dukkha is the ill-fitting chariot wheel. It's that kind of unsatisfactoriness that we can overcome. We can overcome all the reactive suffering that we bring to our human life. And human life we will have pain. The Buddha had pain. We hear that in the suttas, that when he was an old man, he asked Ananda to take over the teaching because his back was hurting. We hear that his body was held together like an old cart held together by straps. But it's clear, and I have a lot of confidence and a lot of faith in this, that the Buddha had overcome, and it is possible to overcome all reactive suffering. So sometimes if I'm teaching other people with physical illness, physical pain, as I do in my work at Breathworks, I'm quite careful to talk about reactive suffering rather than suffering, because we can otherwise have this very naive view that we can just have a perfect life. Well, while we have a human form, there's always going to be some degree of discomfort present. So it's this refinement of the freedom that comes from overcoming reactivity. That's what I believe the Buddha is teaching. And I find that very thrilling, kind of exciting, optimistic and possible, and pragmatic and realistic. Because in a way, if I can learn how to rest comfortably in this body as it is, without the disturbances of the mind, that's very confidence inducing, because there's an honesty about the human condition in there.
It's not just that there's the diminution of the pain of the second arrow, to use that traditional metaphor. The mind not reacting to the pain in the habitual way means that the mind's, in a sense, unconditioned by it. The mind's liberated from it. So it's a fundamental change in experience.
But I think that's true. That's a really good way of looking at it, that the mind is unconditioned by the conditioned, if you like. And to put it a bit more mythically or emotionally, perhaps, one of the things I found really interesting in practice is really sort of investigating what's the experience of the present moment, because a lot of these teachings are about being present, that we know what's happening in the moment directly. And of course, we can think that maybe the present moment is like a pinprick in time. So you're narrowing everything down to something that's quite narrow. But my experience of coming closer and closer to the present moment is that when I really rest in the present, it blooms into something vast and boundless and timeless. I find it so fascinating. So maybe it's a bit like you go through a portal, like you draw your energies together and you rest with a more integrated sense of being present. But it's not a pinprick at all. You then, it's like the mind, we have the potential for the mind to be free of all this conditioned stuff going on and drop into something really vast and really boundless and really timeless. I find that very, very beautiful, really, really interesting. And in my own experience, the only way I can really come anywhere close to that portal is through the conditioned. I have to really come very close to the condition, to what's actually happening, to the dukkha, to the Vedana, to the body. What are my emotions and thoughts? I have to become very, very closer and closer and closer to that. And then that's where the blue sky is. And then, opening out to something boundless. But what I used to think, or what I used to do in my practice before I really started exploring Satipatthana, is I used to think that the blue sky was out. So this was all horrible. I didn't want to be here. And I would try to escape here to get there. And I could almost kind of kid myself that that was a genuine experience. And it's all got very topsy-turvy now. So that's like the blue sky lies at the bottom of the ocean, or the blue sky lies at the bottom of the earth. It's not out there. Or the blue sky lies at the heart of every cell in my body. You just go in and in and in and in and in, deeper and deeper and deeper. Rest, 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 release, release, soften, come closer. Love, there has to be love. There has to be this sense of deep, deep intimacy with what's actually there. And then the mind can release itself. And maybe that's what we mean by some sort of taste of the unconditioned. I'm not sure what the label would be, but I find that really interesting, that to be present isn't something very narrow. It's something broad, but you have to, it is almost like a magic gateway. You have to kind of come closer and closer and closer. And there's something very exquisite and delicate. And then the mind opens out.
Reminded me of one of Bante's aphorisms. Was it something like, the unconditioned is the unconditional acceptance of the conditioned?
Beautiful. Yeah, exactly. That's so beautiful. Yeah. Sati, which is interesting, one of the main words in the Satipatthana Sutta for mindfulness, is related to the word sarati, which means to remember, which is very interesting. So memory actually has a place in Satipatthana practice. It can also mean to recollect, which is a beautiful word because it's recollect, which is, I think, a word for integration. It can also mean to remember the thing we always forget, which is to be present, which I think is quite an interesting way of looking at it, because we forget to be here because we're so caught up in other discursive activity. So there is this present is a product of what's come before, of course. So there is this recollection, remembering. And then sampajana, which Bante translates as continuity of purpose, and sometimes it's called clear comprehension. I think that has resonances of never forgetting the goal, never forgetting the goal. And this is something that Bhante brings out really clearly in his commentary. And one of the ways he talks about sati sampajana, which I think is really good, is you know not only what you are doing, but why you are doing it. So it's the what and the why. So the why would be not losing touch with your vision of going for refuge to the three jewels. You know, why am I practicing? I'm practicing because I want to move towards freedom for my own sake and for the sake of others. I want to profoundly transform my whole perspective on life. And then the what is, well, what am I doing? What's happening? What's happening right now, and how can I transform my relationship to my present moment experience so I can be more aligned with why I'm practicing. And one of the things I love about this sutta, and it's true of all the Dharma, of course, but it seems very true of this sutta, is it's really practical, really pragmatic. It's a kind of guidebook, if you like, about how to transform our experience in line with our goals and our vision. And it's very sensitive, as you say. There's a tremendous quality of sensitivity, intimacy, receptivity. You can't be bullying yourself towards enlightenment. There has to be this quality of deep, deep listening. But the why, I think, is like the compass. It's the orientation, the way you respond to your present moment experience. Sati sampajana, it's a compound term, and we need both sides of that. We need to know what's happening. And then, as he keeps saying, we need to have this sense of why, where is this taking us? And how can we use our awareness to guide the mind stream towards open, expansive states? Just say a little bit more about the structure of the text, which I find really beautiful, the dramatic structure of the text. And there's a wonderful clarity. And it's almost like it is like a drama or a play or some kind of amazing poem. And initially where there's kind of exhortation to practice. And then there's what's called the definition verse, which is the attitudes we bring to all our practice. And we're told we need to bring a diligence, application of appropriate balanced effort. We need to be mindful, clear comprehension, the sense of why we're practicing, and then letting go of being slaves to likes and dislikes, which I think that's the way Subhuti translates it, which I think is really, really good. Traditionally, it's letting go of desires and discontents in regard to the world, which is also very good. So these are the attitudes that we bring to all of our practice. And then we go through the 4 Satipatthanas of body, Vedana, Chitta, and Dhammas, which are all these different dimensions of experience. And then all the way through the sutta, after every verse, every teaching, say on breath, on bodily activities, on posture, there's what's called the chorus. So you get this massive drumbeat. That's how I see it. And the drumbeat is the perspective that we bring to our examination of body, examination of Vedana, and so on. So this is the insight dimension. So we're asked to be aware of it internally, externally, and both internally and externally. And this is really the only place in the sutta where the other regarding dimension is explicitly stated. And then we're asked to be aware of the arising and the passing away, and both the arising and the passing away. So this is the lakshanas, you're seeing into the insubstantial, impermanent nature of all these things. And then we're asked to be mindful of that dimension, whatever it is, body or Vedana or Chitta or Dhammas, to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness, which I think, again, is very beautiful. Why are we being mindful? And then finally, we abide independently, not clinging to anything in the world, which is synonymous with enlightenment. So you have this drumbeat that comes in all the way through. Be aware of your experience, and then self-other, the lakshanas. Be aware, be mindful to the extent necessary for bare knowledge, continuous mindfulness, and abide independent, not clinging to anything in the world. And I really love that. And then at the very end, you got this really beautiful verse about how if you practice like this, you'll get enlightened in, I can't remember what it is, it might be 7 years, and then not 7 years, 6 years, not 6 years, 1 year, and you come right down to 7 days. If you practice like this, you can gain enlightenment in 7 days, which is really wonderful. So this tremendous confidence at the end of the sutta, that if you practice in all these ways, enlightenment is assured in a short period of time. You know, that's what the Buddha is telling us.
My main experience is really through the Anapanasati as a meditation. I'll be introducing some of that in the retreat that we lead. In the Anapanasati, I kind of actually sitting and experiencing the sensations in my body as they arise, and it's very much working from direct experience of, you know, that you're aware of your body, you're aware of sensations in the body, using a kind of direct experience of what's actually happening, noticing how that you, in a way, you can't stop thoughts, and maybe you shouldn't even try to stop thoughts, but you can catch yourself when the thought starts becoming a kind of narrative that's just taking you over. You know exactly what's happening. You're kind of alert to what's happening in your mind, in your body, and then kind of just learning how to let go of it all, and making space for new things to arise. But it always feels as though one's dropping deeper and deeper and coming closer and closer to something that, well, in the Platform Sutra, Bhante talks, or the Hui Neng talks about something coming into being, the essence of mind kind of manifesting, I guess. And although I can see the sutra as kind of progressive in a way, like going through the different Satipatthanas and ending with the Dharma one, at the end, I end up with the mindfulness of breathing. I end up with just breathing and trying to understand or feel, have more of a feeling that I'm not aware of me breathing, but there is just breathing.
You know, the practice taking you to a totally non-doing place by the sound of it, Sona. And Dhammarati, you were saying to us before we started recording this interview, about how you visited the very spot in India where the Buddha delivered this sutta. So could you tell us a bit more about that? It sounded really amazing.
So I looked up all the Delhi guidebooks. I looked at kind of lists of Ashokan monuments in Delhi. Nothing mentioned the site of the Satipatthana Sutta. But anyway, finally, I did manage to track it down. So we turned up at this park in the south of Delhi. It's such a significant text for me that to think you may well be standing on the spot where the text was given. And it's quite likely the Ashokan inscription marks the spot. So it's a park, so the space is being preserved. There's an outcrop of rock in the park, you know, maybe just, I don't know, sort of 15, 20 feet high. And if you were looking for a place to talk to an assembly of monks and lay people, that outcrop of rock would be a pretty good place. At the top of the outcrop is where the Ashokan inscription is. And the public authorities, the Delhi authorities, have built this totally municipal concrete shed around the inscription with a padlocked gate on it, keeping the inscription safe. Obviously, some pilgrims have become aware of this spot. Just put a little bit of gold leaf on the concrete, and there was something really beautiful about something so mundane and so workaday gradually being transformed by the relationship that people had to the site and had to the spot. It lets you go from immediate attention to what's happening now to, as the Buddha describes it in the text, to the realization of Nibbana, and to have something that's so profound and at the same time so grounded. You're encouraged to pay attention to yourself, you're encouraged to pay attention to others, and literally all of life is there in this practice, with something that starts as simply as paying attention to breathing in and breathing out.
I think it's the comprehensive yet simple nature of this approach to practice. You know, the Dharma can seem so complex, can't it? We've got all these, you know, thousands of texts and all these different schools, and but it seems like it's all here in this text. That all the truth of the Dharma is all here in this text, which really is quite simple. And also, having practiced it for quite a number of years, it works.
It seems such a long time to wait till September.
Well, the good news is you only have to wait till August.